My name is Drew Hartley, and I will be your host today. I'm an account executive and insurance leader at AIS. AIS is an employee-owned cloud transformation company that delivers enterprise solutions in the areas of cloud adoption, app modernization, and data intelligence. Over the last 4 decades, we've been entrusted with some of the most challenging IT projects for global brands and government agencies across highly regulated industries like financial services, insurance, federal, defense, healthcare, life sciences, and energy. Since becoming a partner in 1994, we've continually invested and gained differentiating performance in new technologies like Azure in 2008 and Power Platform in 2019. Today's webinar will have 2 parts. First will be a Q&A discussion with one of our special guests, Jonathan Silverman. And then after that, Jonathan and I will invite 2 more guests to join us for a panel discussion where we will answer audience questions. Let's get started with the Q&A discussion. I'm joined by Jonathan Silverman. He is a Director of Insurance Industry Solutions at Microsoft. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about you and what you do in your role with Microsoft?
Sure. I've been with Microsoft for 15 years. I've had a number of roles. My first role was a services executive within Microsoft Consulting because I do come from a business process background. From there, I actually went into the Worldwide Industry Group where I helped to define some of our insurance motions as it relates to industry plays. And now I'm part of our US Financial Services Group, where I support our account teams in having discussions with our customers about the insurance industries and the technologies that enable some of the solutions that we're working on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We're really excited to hear from you and learn from you. I'd like to start by getting your perspective on the current state of the insurance industry. What notable changes and trends are you seeing, and how is it impacting the insurance industry?
So that's a really interesting question because it gets me to think more about COVID, right? And how has COVID impacted our industry? And from what I've seen, there's been an accelerated move to cloud, number one. So because we're all in this remote scenario and we don't have access to all of our resources locally, a lot of our carriers have migrated to having more of a cloud-centric strategy. I did mention remote services. How do you create experiences remotely that feel the same as if you and I are in the same room? And when you think about the insurance industry and how it's changed over the years, it's become critically important to be able to deliver to our customers regardless of where or how they want to be connected with. You got to think about how do you create those differentiated experiences in a remote world, right? How do you create a white glove type service when we can't be face to face? And how do I provide you with the information you need when you need it? Even if it's just, hey, where's my policy in the life cycle? I think we're going to see more products and services, new products related to pandemics, for example, and call it workplace continuity. So what do I do? How do I provide solutions to my customers as a carrier that allows them to maintain their continuity of their business, even given this type of a scenario? And then, the other thing I would expand on is collaboration, because now that we're remote and, in a hybrid environment, and some people are going back to work, some people aren't, how do you continue to collaborate, regardless of where you are, whether you're at home, whether you're at work, whether you're on vacation, whether you're sitting on the beach? It's become almost irrelevant where you are, as long as you can focus and get your job done. So we'll see an expansion of services, technology enabling these new scenarios. It's very interesting to me, and I think it's happening so fast that when COVID first hit, I think in the first, now that it's been almost a year and a half, in the first year, what we noticed was a 300% increase in cloud services usage.
Yeah.
And teams went from, almost 0 to, 140 million users, something crazy like that. So when you look at, everything that's happened in the industry due to COVID, it's really taken us and accelerated our transformation as it relates to digitization.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to me, I think what we've seen is an acceleration of what was happening. Mostly, right? Some new product services that sort of hit the pandemic angle inside the insurance industry, but it does seem like a lot of this was how do you now go on this methodical cloud transformation potentially into now you have to transform overnight because you have a whole workforce that needs all these tools, and the cloud obviously enables that in a way that older technologies couldn't or different platforms couldn't. So definitely seems like an accelerant. So would you say do you just see that trend continuing? Do you see anything stopping? It seems like this is the new world that will continue and persist going forward.
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple of different perspectives, right? There are some companies that are looking to open their doors immediately. Some are thinking about a hybrid type solution where some people are in the office, some people are at work, working at home. But I think what it comes down to is what are you trying to accomplish, right? I look at some of our carriers and I say, with all these investments in real estate, is that going to continue? Or are we going to see a glut of available real estate in some major cities, right? Why invest in, real estate if you're not going to take advantage of it? If you can rent it, great. Otherwise, maybe you want to sell it and invest that money in, other types of investments in order to manage your reserves.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting. So it seems like some companies are probably set up, some insurance companies are set up to succeed potentially better in this sort of accelerated world, this new world, and maybe others are starting to fall behind. What do you think differentiates a company that is set up to win with the state of the industry now and where it's going?
So I think it's a matter of strategy, right? There are certain things that are inevitable when you think about, the evolution of technology in our industry, right? Everything was mainframe. And then we went to client server, there was the internet, and now cloud, right? Cloud services, remote. We're on this journey, and different companies are in different areas of the journey. They're at different points within their journey. Some rapidly started as COVID began, right? Some were already well into that journey, and COVID really didn't have much of an impact. It was just a matter of turning things on, right? The good news is because of the availability of cloud and the fact that a lot of these resources are software as a service, right? Whether we're talking about Teams or the Office products, for example, it's very easy to transition from being on-prem to being able to move to a cloud-based solution. And we were able to see everybody adapt, right? I don't think there was one customer that I can call out that actually missed a beat and felt like they were in trouble. So everybody had access to what they needed. And now everybody is rethinking, how do we take advantage of these services to improve our business, right? Because the two things that I think came out of COVID were, one, we need to lower our cost of operations, especially if a lot of our resources are working remotely. And by optimizing those operations, we're also going to differentiate those customer experiences, right? So the two things that I'm seeing that are really, really developing are looking at operations related to claims, underwriting, fraud detection, for example. And then how are we using that to differentiate with those customer experiences so that even though the customer doesn't have that direct connect, they're being treated in a way that feels like a white glove type experience, right? And I think it's important to note that the next generation of customers are also the next generation of employees. And it's really important that we not only think about what our customers want to be successful, but what do we need to provide our employees to allow them to collaborate and provide that differentiated service to those customers.
Yeah. Yeah. And it strikes me that one of the big shifts underneath all of that is that strategy you're talking about, the flexibility, the customer experiences, the employee experiences, all have to be built on this bedrock of data. That is sort of this key component that unlocks the opportunity to do all those really, really well. And I think when you look across all of the successful companies across any industry today, you see these companies that are separating themselves from the pack are leveraging data in really, really powerful ways. And they've built data-driven cultures too, so that whatever that business strategy is, it's enabled by that data. How are you seeing insurance companies using data to start differentiating themselves and improve their business outcomes in the marketplace?
That's a great question, because I think data can be the key differentiator, right? And I'll give you an example. So, through, again, COVID, right, we couldn't meet with people. So how do you provide somebody with a life insurance policy without taking on too much risk, as an example, right? And we worked with a specific customer using an insurtech type company, specifically focused on AI, to provide a 60-year-old healthy male with an insurance policy in under 10 minutes. So that's not possible without considering third-party data, right? And other sources of data. And when you think about the decisions and the insights that we need in order to provide those differentiated customer experiences, even improve those operational efficiencies that I talked about earlier. The other thing I think about when it comes to data is, how can I use data, right, to improve the claims process or even avoid a claim, right? So let me give you an example. Let's say through weather modeling, we recognize that there's a hailstorm going through a certain neighborhood, right? The carrier can engage, send emails to the insureds in that neighborhood and say, hey, we recognize that there's a potential, hailstorm coming through your area. If you don't want to lose your car for a couple of days, we would recommend that you put your car in the garage. But at the same time, right, if you think about what you can do with this data, you can change the game with the customer. So in a case like that, let's say there's a tornado going through. I can't move your house, right? But I can give you advice on how to keep your family safe, right? So I could send you an email saying, hey, there's a potential for tornadoes coming through your town. Here's how we recommend you take care of your family given this circumstance. Another thing that, I brought up the other day with a customer is, and any parent who's listening will get this, right? When your child turns 16, they start driving. And parents start getting nervous. But we have all this data that we can use, right? So for example, and I use this scenario. My daughter is driving down a country road. It's late at night. It's like one of the first times she's driving by herself. A deer jumps out of nowhere. She swerves and goes straight into a tree. Now, traditionally, you're going to wait for first notice of loss, right? Now, if my daughter got hurt and she's sitting in her car unconscious, then for the carrier to wait for a phone call could be really risky for my daughter's life. But what if in an instance like that, because we have our telephone in the car, because we know that we can connect to telematics and everything that's happening within the car, we should be able to identify the swerve, identify the abrupt stop, and using AI, engage my daughter in such a way that a support person's phone rings at the same time as my daughter's does. The support person gets a notification that says, hey, this person was just in an accident. It's Rachel. And they go, hi, Rachel, can you hear me? Are you okay? Rachel doesn't respond. You immediately send an ambulance. First notice of response was automated, right? So we've gone from protecting a vehicle and protecting an asset to protecting a life. That's where things are going to change as we start making better use of data. So data now, it's not just about understanding fraud or understanding, the driver's behavior, but being able to engage in the case of an incident.
Yeah, and I think that's a really exciting evolution in the insurance industry too, right? So rather than being like you pay all this money, right, for the event that you get the product, which is what happens when you have a claim, to pivoting to say, no, you actually pay this money on a recurring basis. You get value now, right? There's value, right? I know, whether it could be healthcare companies, right? It could be, health insurance companies that are trying to say, okay, yes, we're not just going to handle you when you have to go to the doctor because you're sick, but we're going to try to become a wellness company. So how do we have wellness products? How do we have safety products, right? And I think that's a really good thing, all built, to your point, on that data, right? Because no one company has all the data they need to do those sorts of things.
Yeah, and that brings up another topic, right? That the whole concept of IoT and the data that comes from devices, right? When we think about insurance and we think about technology, telematics technology isn't built in the insurance space, it's built in automotive, right? And, healthcare solutions are built in healthcare, and agriculture solutions are built in agriculture, and workplace safety solutions are built in manufacturing. And as insurers, right, we can take advantage of this data, right? Think about smart buildings or smart cities, right? Look at what the city of Denver is doing, right? They're monitoring all these devices so that they can better understand traffic patterns and keep people safe, right? Identifying times of day that would be safest for children to be playing outside, for example, or using workplace safety to avoid workman's comp claims and keeping people more safe, or gamifying life insurance. One of the things I said to a carrier when I was presenting to them a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about my mom, and when my dad passed away, my mom knew nothing about insurance, and it took her a really long time to pick up the phone and call the carrier. But if the carrier could use data and understand, again, through first notice of loss, that my dad had passed away, maybe they could change the experience for my mom. Send her flowers, right? That's really interesting. I'm assuming you can still see me.
Still see you, still hear you.
All right, that was really weird. My apologies. So if they would have sent my mom flowers, right, and engaged her differently and said, we're so sorry that your husband passed away. He was a great customer of ours. He was very funny every time he came into the office. He really lit up the room. We understand this is a difficult time for you. We're going to start the claim. Please call this number when you're ready. And I think the relationship would have changed. So rather than my mom calling and saying, hey, can you guys cut me a check? What might have happened is she might have called them, had a discussion, and allowed them to reinvest that money on her behalf, right? Again, changing the relationship, becoming a trusted advisor, as opposed to just somebody who's providing a financial benefit for a bad situation.
Right. And those, as a company, those are the best customers you can have, right? You change it from a transactional based relationship to a differentiated experiential relationship. And so those are the customers that you want to have. And especially in insurance, when at times it feels very commodity based, right? It's like, well, I could have a product with any company in that space, and I'm just going to shop based on price. You now have this opportunity to say, no, it's not just price, but it's about all the holistic products and services and relationships that you get as a part of that. Do you think, going back to sort of your point on IoT, telematics, third-party data, those sources continue to grow exponentially, and I think seems like the companies that are preparing themselves to win in the current industry are the ones that have a vision and a strategy on how to tie in different sources, right? So you talked about, it could be IoT devices, whether that's a customer's phone or a watch or a wristband. It could be from a vehicle. It could be weather, traffic. It could be all these different kinds of third-party data. What's going to happen to companies that don't have that strategy and vision?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think they'll have a tough time being competitive. right? And then it's going to be a matter of, how do we become competitive in this environment? How do we accelerate our transformation, or are we looking to be acquired?
Mm.
Right? I think it's really important for us as an industry to understand that the world is changing.
Hmm.
The next generation of customers is the next generation of employees, and they work differently and they buy differently. And it's really important that we get their point of view and their perspective. Otherwise, we may end up in a position where, we don't have the right type of employees and resources to deliver on these differentiated experiences. We don't have the right resources to improve operations, lower costs, and improve profitability, right? So when I look at all these transformations over time, right, and we can talk about moving from the mainframe to client server to the internet to the cloud, et cetera. I think it's one of those things where if you fight the change, you're going to lose,
Hmm.
because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Right.
And if you can't deliver on your customers and show the customers that you know who they are, you're going to have a challenge. I got a piece of mail, and I tell this story now and again. I got this piece of mail probably about 6 months ago. No, it was before COVID, so it was about a year and a half ago, that said, give us a call and we'll save you $500 on your car insurance. So I called. I thought, why not, right? Let's see what happens. They were very excited that somebody called. Probably one guy sitting in a room by himself, nobody calls, right? And he asked me like 8 questions, and I answered them all very honestly, because I was serious about this situation. And the last question he asked me was, Jonathan, who's your current carrier? And my response was, you are. And they said, well, you must be a new customer. And I said, no, I've been your customer for 25 years. And they said, oh, we must have acquired you through an acquisition. And I said, no, I've been your customer for 25 years. And they escalated to, a manager. We had another discussion. Long story short, I'm no longer their customer.
Yeah.
Because if after 25 years you have no idea who I am, you don't deserve my business. And a
Yeah.
lot of people are thinking that way.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think it's just another example of there's certainly a business disconnect, but there was a data disconnect somewhere, right? That marketing campaign said, "Hey, we're going to send this out to prospective customers." Well, you are not a prospective customer, so how do they not tie that data together? The agent you talk to should have a system that connects some dots and says, "Hey, the data I'm getting about this customer maps to this current customer," right? And that should have stopped that conversation early.
And I called from my cell phone, and when I get notifications from that company, I would get them through my cell phone. So there was no reason for them to not know who I am. They know my voice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they've recorded it and they use it for authentication. They know my phone number, right? How is it they had no idea who I was? And what is the impact of feeling that way, right? Remember, we're human beings, and we want to know that our business is important to the carrier. And to your point, they have all this data on me. There is no reason why they shouldn't have known who I am. And
Mm-hmm.
not only that, but they should have known who I am, and they should have been in a position to, number one, apologize for me getting it, and two, do something for me anyway. Hey, we're sorry for the inconvenience. We're going to give you a $50 credit on your policy. And at least then, they're making the effort. If there is no effort, right, then customers of today are not going to stand for it. They're looking for the quickest way to get things done. They want everybody to know who they are,
Yeah.
right? And the only way you can do this stuff is with data.
Yeah, right. So it's all about personalization, right? No
Correct.
matter what channel I interact with you, I want you to know, act like you know who I am, right? So if I
Correct.
call, I want the person I talk to know that. If I go on the app, I want the app to respond to me appropriately. Show me the data that's relevant to me. Don't treat me like every other customer out there. And that fundamentally has to be built on this trove of data. So yeah, I think it's a really key point. And every interaction between a customer and the company is an opportunity to strengthen a relationship or to hurt that relationship. Your
Agreed.
example, hurt that relationship, right? To the point of no return, right? And
Agreed.
so each one is extremely valuable. So how, I think that one of the common phrases that is out there right now is about, we need to be data driven. We need a
Mhm.
data driven culture. What is that? What do you think that means? Like, what does that highlight? What do companies need to do, and how do you do that? It strikes me that it's a requirement. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but it strikes me that companies going forward do need to have a data driven culture. Data can't be in a corner of a company. It has to actually be a cultural component. What do you think?
Well, I completely agree. I think one of the challenges, though, is that data has grown exponentially, right?
Mhm.
And customers keep asking me about how do we control our data? And I don't think it's about control as much as it is about reliability, right? If I am going to pull from multiple sources of reliable data, then I can make a decision that I can be comfortable with because, I'm using reliable data, therefore I can rely on my decision. But, you've got to be able to manage those outcomes kind of on the fly because the data is changing so quickly.
Mhm.
And some data you're going to get in real time. And it's really important that we understand what we're trying to accomplish, right? It is about business outcomes. So,
Mhm.
the business outcome could be, I want Jonathan to be able to get an insurance policy for his vehicle with 5 clicks, right? And it's got to be competitive. And how do you do that? And if Jonathan has to make one more click, he's going to drop, and we
Mhm.
won't get that opportunity. And I think that is what we need to do, better understand our audience. And to do that, we need data. And
Mhm.
then better approach our audience. So where do they live, right, in a digital world? Where do they spend their time? How do we connect with them? What are we missing, right? And then using that data to not only engage them, but to keep them engaged. After I buy a policy, I shouldn't disappear,
Mhm.
right? And I should never hear from you again. That doesn't work, right? There was one example that I really, really liked out of Canada with Manulife, where, you know, they recognize that if they give somebody a life insurance policy, that they have 2 touch points a year, right? When they send you your renewal and when you make your payment. But by providing a wearable, right, thinking healthcare, and gamifying it so that, people are competing with one another to stay healthy, right? And again, if you can keep people healthy, then they pay their premiums longer and you wait longer for the death benefit. The bottom line is they went from 2 touch points a year to almost 20 touch points a month. So from 2 touch points a year to 240 touch points a year. That's changing the game. And the
Yeah.
way they're doing it is with data coming from devices. And they're gamifying it so you and I can compete on
Mhm.
getting healthy. And by sharing the data, we get access to a points program. And you can use those points to buy gift cards, lower your premium, get a discount at a hotel, all kinds of things, right? Again, using data to change the relationship. And that's an example on the life side, but you see how it's happening also on the automobile side, where you and I could be competing about who's a better driver. And I know when we get into the next section that there's going to be a couple of other interesting case studies that we'll be able to talk about. But I think about monitoring driver behavior. I think about, monitoring what's happening outside of the vehicle, avoiding accidents, avoiding claims, looking for fraud and avoiding fraud detection, identifying those things early, because all of these things cost the carriers money and impact the experience to the customer.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a few things, right? You talked about the exponential growth of data, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're getting data at a speed that's we've never been close to before, and that's growing exponentially. We're talking about data not just internal to companies, but external to companies too. And you mentioned real-time data, streaming data, like all those. So you got more data that you need faster, you need to use right away, and that really necessitates, I think, a new way of looking at data platforms. It can't be your old data warehouse. It can't be data in spreadsheets, right? It can't be, we even think that it has to be in the cloud, right? To be able to manage this efficiently and at scale because of all the things that are happening. And because you integrate with other providers of data who are in cloud, providing those typically through cloud environments, right? You need that infrastructure ecosystem to be able to pull this off. But it strikes me as a different way of thinking about things and a different way of building a platform. So for insurance companies that are doing it right, do you see them doing certain things? Are they staffing their teams different ways? Are they investing in certain technologies? Or because you can't just say, hey, let's go build a data platform and poof, it happens, right? What are you seeing them do to be effective in this transition?
So you got to be planful, right? You got to say, hey, what are the business outcomes I'm trying to get at? And from that perspective, how can technology enable those business outcomes, right? And I see technology as an enabler, right? It's not technology for technology's sake. You don't get a data warehouse solution and then automatically things work, right? I mean, you really have to think about what you're trying to accomplish and how it's going to work for you. The whole concept of managing data is changing. We need to understand data lineage, right? So a lot of customers are saying, hey, here's our problem, and we want to address it. And there's three things we really look at. What's foundational as it relates to what are the things that we have to do from an infrastructure perspective to enable some of the things we want to do, whether it's creating a hybrid environment or looking at cloud benefit. And again, it's got to be business outcome focused. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Modernization is really cool, but not just for modernization's sake, right? It's got to be something that's driving value, and you got to use data in order to make the right decisions. So a lot of customers are saying, okay, I need to create a more intimate relationship with my customer. How do I do that? Well, part of it is about enabling your employees, right? Giving them the tools and the data they need to provide a service to your customers. And how do you give them that data and make that data reliable? Understand the lineage of that data and where it's changed. And then how do you use that data to improve those experiences? One of the things customers hate more than anything is giving you data and then having you ask them the same questions, right?
Yeah.
So, a great example of this is something that we've done recently with Allstate, where Allstate had all these recordings of conversations, and they were sending them overseas to get transcribed, and then they would come back and they'd have to have people go through and start filling up a customer record. But if you had a claim and you keep calling in to find out where your claim is, you're being asked the same questions over and over and over again. So they came to us and they basically used our transcription service to transcribe all these conversations on the fly, and then use AI to populate the customer field,
Yeah.
right? So saving millions and millions of dollars on the transcription and improving that customer experience, because the customer doesn't have to ask the same questions anymore. When they call in, you automatically know you're calling about your claim. Let me tell you where it is, right? And it changes that experience, because the second I pick up the phone, I already know who you are and I already know what you want.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think we've talked about sort of those business use cases, but and we talked about sort of the data platform side of it, but there is this intelligence layer on top of it, right? That you're starting to get to, right? What are the AI components, the machine learning components? Because there's a few different ways this data is unlocked, right? One is just the ability to see the data, right? That's valuable, but and interpret it and understand the business for what that tells you. But the other one is to start making better decisions, and having the data point out things to you, right? So rather than you interpreting the data presenting, hey, here's what the data is showing. You should look at this, or this is what's noticeable, or this is different. And then there's the customer side of it too, and the relationship side, right? So there's just so many different angles that it can use. There's efficiency side of it. There's the relationship side of it. So many different opportunities. So maybe two more questions before we go over to our panel discussion. That was a good example of sort of the AI ML use cases using Azure Cognitive Services. What other ways you see AI and ML really sort of changing the game now that those technologies continue to evolve, become more powerful and easier to use?
So there's a lot of things. The process of insurance overall, whether we're talking about underwriting, or claims or fraud detection, think about risk modeling the way, we've always looked at data linearly. And now we can change it and look at it more visually, and focus actuaries, for example, on their business or their job, and surface up anomalies within the data, drop outliers automatically, lower standard deviations, and improve insights.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really what it's all about, right? Is, how do you look at a claims process and identify upfront whether it needs to go through legal, right? Or how do you identify claims that are fraudulent, right? Like a staged accident, because of COVID and people need to make money, right? Or being able to look at a photo and identify within that photo fraud, or determine the cost of fixing a damaged vehicle, right? We're using data, cognitive services, artificial intelligence to do all of this across the board. And it's changing the experiences, it's changing our business. And if we don't embrace it, then somebody's going to eat our lunch, right? I mean, look at some of the, and I hate using the word disruption, right? But look at what's happening in the insurtech space, right? A lot of these insurtechs are building pieces of these solutions, or building end-to-end solutions that they're building rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
They're not getting bogged down in the process, and they're using data and third-party data and artificial intelligence and analytics to make better decisions faster. And it's working for them and this new generation of, employee / customer.
Yeah, definitely.
And we're seeing it across the industry.
Yeah. I think that's a great transition point. So why don't we wrap up our Q&A and bring in our other two guests, because I want to stick with that insurtech theme for a minute.
Thanks, Drew.
One of our guests. So Jonathan, this has been awesome. Thanks for going back and forth with me a little bit. Really appreciate that. It's really interesting to hear your perspective on the insurance industry. We're going to now transition into the panel discussion. We're going to bring on two more guests. Adam Kokari is a portfolio development lead for M12. M12 is Microsoft's venture fund. And we're also going to bring on Yared Sagai, and he is a solution director and data specialist at AIS, and one of the main contributors to the AIS data intelligence framework. The audience members are welcome to submit questions via the webinar platform, and we will take those live. And as those come in, our marketing manager, Michaela Kinnell, will chime in with those questions. while we wait on those, I'm gonna steal the forum for just a minute to ask a question to Adam on the topic of insurtech. So right, like Jonathan said, very interesting space to watch, that insurtech space. The insurtech companies continue to enter the insurance arena at a growing pace. They come with advanced technology, massive funding. They're not tied to any legacy inertia or old ways of doing things. They're very greenfield, so they can just build them in the best way that they know how from the beginning. I see sort of the B2B insurtech side, which is how are insurtech, coming to partner with insurance companies, and the B2C side, where you have insurtech companies coming in to compete with the traditional insurance players. So, Adam, I'd love to get your perspective. Start with just kind of what you do with M12, why Microsoft has a venture fund, and just tell us what you're seeing in the insurtech space.
Sure, thank you, Drew, and thank you for having me. So yeah, Adam Kukari, I am a operating partner here at M12, which is Microsoft's venture fund. In general, we operate much like any VC fund you would encounter. So we're looking globally for what we think are some of the most innovative and high growth early stage companies that have the potential to transform different industries, specifically the ones and the areas that Microsoft cares about. This doesn't mean we're looking for startups that are already working with Microsoft or one of our partners. Really take an agnostic view and are looking for technology and innovations that we think could be, coming down the line or important to our customers, so we can really have a pulse on what's happening out there in the ecosystem. And that's primarily why we exist. We're obviously, driven by financial returns, and we're investing to hopefully see those companies exit through an IPO or acquisition one day. But it's also a great way for us to learn about the things that are happening out in startup ecosystems around the world, and bring some of that innovation to our customers, to our partners. And that's what my team primarily does. So after we make an investment, we work really hands-on with our portfolio companies to either help them build on our platforms, co-innovate with our customer base and our account teams around the world, and hopefully deliver experiences that are better than the kind of some of their parts.
Yeah.
When it comes to insurance, yeah, we do see a lot of innovation, right? And I almost think about it in three big buckets, right? You have companies that are creating technology that can be applied to by insurers to do things better. You guys talked about data, kind of stitching together disparate sources of data. That's a technology that could be applicable to many different industries, but we're seeing real applicability for insurance companies that have this problem and have so many touch points across their customers. So one thing is how do we kind of take these horizontal technologies, cybersecurity is another important one, and really make them relevant and help insurers do their jobs better. I think second, as you mentioned, there's kind of insurance-specific technology. Things that I think are really exciting are like using computer vision to verify and assess damages and automate claims. I think there's some really interesting use cases in the kind of customer communication and call center space. We have a few investments here using AI to interact with customers, kind of take the front end of some of those engagements. We are also definitely seeing some of that like live and real-time analysis of driver safety. Jonathan mentioned this. I have a portfolio company called Netrodyne that actually has some dashboard cameras facing the driver and using radar and LiDAR to kind of really look at what's happening on the road in real time and giving kind of risk scores based on the driver's performance and what's happening out in the world. That's primarily for the fleets, but that could be also turned easily into some valuable data sets for insurance companies, and they're talking with that around those use cases right now. And then, another area we're really interested in is kind of how do you combat some of the misinformation and synthetic data we see out there now, with images becoming so easily to manipulate, even video to recreate whole human, videos with deep fakes. We're interested in kind of the technology to combat that, so make sure that insurance companies can really feel confident about using things like video and images captured right from a person's phone. These are actual real pieces of evidence they can use in the claims process and not doctored. Those are just a few areas where we're kind of looking at deeply. And then I think the third piece you mentioned is just actually insurance companies that are using kind of new technology and digital platforms to deliver insurance in new ways. And we do have an investment in this space as well, specifically around cybersecurity insurance. It's a company called Appe, and this whole area of cyber insurance is just so new. There's such a rapidly changing landscape, and obviously these ransomware attacks are becoming more and more prevalent and more costly. So it requires a whole different approach to really how you look at risk, how you analyze the changing nature of cyber threats. And I think we believe startups and some of these specialists who actually come from the field of cybersecurity are actually best positioned to deliver new experiences and protect customers from that risk.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks. Yeah, those are two really interesting examples. Are you seeing with like the Netrodyne example? I mean, the technology sounds really cool. Are you seeing fundamental business outcomes being achieved because of that? Improved safety, improved driver behavior, decreased accidents, claims, costs, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. Some of the case studies with their large customers are showing 70% reduction in accidents. And I think there's both the alerting people when they're getting out of kind of banned and not being safe, and just being able to actually go back and coach people and help them understand that maybe where they could have improved their driving. It's not just kind of in the moment, but also provides analytics on safety over time. And big business outcomes for the safety of those folks. Right now, it's mostly on trucking, so commercial vehicles, but you can see that long term being applied to commercial vehicles as well. So people's vehicles as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, appreciate that perspective. Some really cool stuff that M12 is doing. I'm sure you're getting to see a lot of that leading edge innovation that's going on in the space, and a lot of those have applicable use cases for insurance. So that's an exciting space to be. Okay, Jonathan, I mean, you touched on this a little bit. Anything that you would add on from an InsurTech perspective, on either side, the partnership opportunity for the B2B InsurTech companies or the competitive nature on the B2C companies?
So there was one thing that I thought I would bring up. There are times that I engage with M12 as it relates to customer scenarios, right? And one that's really interesting that I like a lot is the fact that translation is really important when you're thinking about a remote world, right? When all of a sudden, data centers or call centers, have to be closed down, how do you then, work with your customers if you only speak English? And interestingly enough, we have technology that can translate into, upwards of 70 languages. But what we found really interesting, and this is something that Adam's team was able to support us with, is, we had one customer who said, hey, could we use a voice chat bot to, engage potentially in Spanish if there was a car accident? And we said, sure. But then what we realized was, if Spanish is your native language and you get into a car accident and you're a little frazzled, you may speak a form of Spanish and English combined that is referred to as Spanglish, right? And there was a partner that Adam's team's been working with that actually has a solution that can interpret that language and turn it into either English or Spanish. So I could be, speaking English to you, you could be speaking Spanish to me. We're hearing each other's languages, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're speaking Spanglish, I can hear it in English.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And those are the types of technologies that are going to change the world, right? Because if you're one person who speaks only one language, but you can converse in 60 to 70 languages, you've just changed the game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, that's really great.
That's great. And I've got a question here for Yard. So we've talked about some awesome business outcomes and use cases, but for organizations trying to get started and take action on, creating a foundation and building the platform for this, they need a place to start. So Yard, you've helped create the data intelligence framework for AIS. Can you explain a little bit about what that is and why it's valuable?
It's fantastic to hear the stories that what can be done with the data, right? I'm going to talk about how to get the data into a place where you can apply all the business outcomes that you guys are talking about. So that's where the AIS data intelligence comes in. At the core, the idea is simple. You have a source systems, you connect to those source systems, you bring this data, you process it, you apply. But there are challenges there, right? One is, where is the source system? How reliable is the source system? How fast can we get this data, especially when we talk about telematics? Do we have the infrastructure, the process to collect this data into our platform, right? And what the regulatories? Is there a PII data in it? Who can see this data? How can we collect safely this data? So that the AIS data intelligence is a well-defined, repeatable process that addresses both technical and non-technical aspects of a data. So this process made it easier whether you have a small project or a large enterprise project that can be scalable. Not only that, you may have a system already on-prem, you want to migrate it. It will help you to analyze and to help move this data from on-prem into your cloud, and then adapt using this cloud technologies to transform you using the services. It includes not only collecting data, analyzing, ingesting, storage, and then on top of that, the modeling and the applying analytics on it. Then finally, it helps you do visualization with any technology that you want. Hopefully that will answer at the very high level what the framework is.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on that, Yard, if I can. So we've helped numerous clients with this, go through this process and sort of evolve their data approach into something that can keep up with the speed and scale and be able to deliver the business outcomes that we were talking about. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see customers facing, and how can they overcome them?
So what we have seen is customers, from regulatory perspective, right? The data is sensitive. The data cannot be even traversed on public network, right? That's one of the challenge. The other challenge is the changing data. You're collecting data at this time, but now that data has transformed. How do you keep track of that changing data, especially like telematic data or log data that's coming, and how do you keep track of that? So that's the biggest challenge they have. And then once they have this data, they used to collect data from certain sources. Now they are able to collect data from multiple sources. How do they create correlation between this data? Those are the biggest challenge that they have, and which we are able to help them solve.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Got another question here, kind of following up on that. You know, the data intelligence framework, it kind of provides these factories and these different stages to help get to data intelligence. One thing here is, what practical steps must an insurance company take to become that insights-driven organization, to be data-driven, both from a culture and a technology perspective, for whoever wants to field that?
I can go next. I can take, at least from the technology perspective, I can give an answer then. So one of the challenge is technology. I mean, insurance companies are dealing with is they're collecting a lot of data, and there are a lot of data coming from a third-party data. One is, like I said earlier, creating correlation. Two, they are also collecting business data, right? How do their internal customer and external customer take advantage of this data? How do you even know that there is this data there? So one thing we need to do is that creating that data culture, at helping customers learn about their data and using either technology and processes to help them discover the data that they have that meets their business need. I'm not sure if I answered that question, but that's the training, the education that happens within the organization to learn about this new data and the existing data that's coming.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Yard. I think the data sort of operations was very siloed in the past. And so there was, small teams, generally that sort of manage the data warehouse, right? And the data marts and the reports and everything that an end user wanted had to go through that team. And I think what we're seeing now, that just is built on the whole concept of SaaS platforms and user-friendly platforms and low-code, no-code platforms is not that it needs to go through the IT gatekeeper anymore. That IT has a process to provide the data in a way that the end users can use and manipulate and traverse and analyze on their own. And so instead of having a large enterprise with 50 people who are the data experts, now you're trying to create a company where every employee is a data expert, and you've created platforms where those end users, those internal employees can then go and leverage it on their own. So I think that's one interesting. Jonathan, what have you seen as far as that, like companies trying to become truly insights driven?
So it's so interesting that you brought up data silos, right? Because I still think that one of the things we have to do first is understand the insights from our own data, right? And we can go back to my customer example where the carrier had no idea who I was, right? That should not happen anymore. But if you can't control the data that you have inside, remember the old garbage in, garbage out, right? If we don't get control of the data that we have on-prem and better understand that data, how are you going to get value out of external data? Is always my question, right? If you don't know who I am just based on all the information you have of me, and what if I'm working with multiple divisions of your company, right? So, maybe I'm buying life and I'm bundling, home and auto, maybe I have key man insurance, maybe I have health insurance, and maybe it's all with the same carrier. But you know what? If I wanted to talk to somebody, depending on who I want to talk to, I got to make 5 different phone calls. And that's an inconvenience for me as a customer. So I think it's really important that we understand our data, understand what's missing from our data in order to, get the insights that we're looking for, and then be comfortable with the data. Now, one thing that Yard said is, we got to have data that's reliable. It's got to come from reliable sources. If we've got to cleanse the data, then we cleanse the data, but we've got to be able to access it and access it when we need it. When we've got that customer in front of us that says, hey, what should I be doing next? And if we have enough data, then we can guide that conversation. We can understand the next best action for that customer. We can understand how we can provide them with a different level of protection. And again, going back to the not just protecting an asset, but protecting an individual and changing the game, because that's what we need to do, and data is the only way to do it.
Yep. And to add to that, one thing we do on this with the data intelligence framework is doing that strategic assessment time. Organizations, they know they have the data, but they're afraid of the PII, or maybe I'm not allowed to see this, right? So by really going deeper understanding, you can still stitch together the data in a without violating any kind of regulatory rules.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think
And
all
guys,
those
we're coming
things.
up here on time, but I wanted to say, this is a great point. How can we understand the data that we have today and understand some of the problem statements? What are some of the use cases that we're coming up against today that we're losing customers around, and proving out a proof of concept solution around those big challenges to meet those business outcomes and start to chunk off some of the massive data amounts that we have. So great discussion. Anything you guys want to close out with today before we let the audience go?
I just want to say thank you for including us in this discussion, and thank you for your partnership. I think that from a data perspective, you guys bring a lot of value to the industry, and I really hope that, you know, some of our carriers and our audience members recognize the value that you bring.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, AS Microsoft have a long, deep partnership, and we've done a lot of really great work, especially in the data space, and a lot of really exciting stuff to come. So, well, that's all the time we have for the webinar today. I hope for our audience this has been interesting and valuable, and helps evoke some different ideas, helps individuals see what's going on in the industry, where it's going, and what's necessary to win going forward. Because everything we talked about is a requirement going forward. This is no longer an optional thing for insurance companies. So it's obvious that the data is going to be the foundation of how insurance companies operate and succeed going forward. For more information about AIS and the Data Intelligence Framework, you can check out our website, www.ais.com. Jonathan, Yared, Adam, thank you so much for being part of this. We're grateful for your time. And to our audience, thank you. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.